Hi, Meredith. Hi, Lou. Hi, Nicole.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Now this, holy moly, somebody left this on my desk, I guess. It doesn't matter. It's good. Can't have too many of them.
Do you want them?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to put them on?
Pardon?
Do you want them or do you
Gosh, I think, not now, not tonight. We're going to do the video, right? And then we won't have a lot of time. How much, Robbie's been doing an hour, but I think an hour and hour and a half, hour 15, whatever.
shoot for an hour and 15?
Well, like, shoot. Is this, have you advertised it for an hour?
No.
Oh,
But with Robbie, it was awesome.
yeah, well, Robbie doesn't like, he doesn't talk as much as I do. Has anybody ever been to Austin, Texas before? Is it a nice city? I never really, I've been there the last 2 days, but I really never got to see it.
I'm a UT graduate.
Don was there. The other Don.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I got stuck, I took my daughter's doing a summer internship with a company there, and I drove her there.
I mean,
Well, we drove together.
when I was there, it was 300,000 people. It was a wonderful, wonderful place to be. A nice, and it's grown tenfold since then.
It's a million people. It's a million people.
Million, but isn't it like 3 million metro area? Or maybe it's
It looked like it to me.
Yeah.
It looked like it to me. It was unbelievable.
I still think it has a lot of character, but it's not the town that it was when I went to school there.
Well, they have a lot of T-shirts in there, all over town saying, "Keep Austin weird." Or keep Austin, yeah, that's what it said, keep Austin weird.
When I was there, I'll just briefly say this. When I was there, you could go to the communications building at 6 o'clock in the morning and get tickets to Austin City Limits. So you just get an idea of what the scale was at that time. That was,
Wow,
those days are long, long, long gone. So I'm giving
yeah.
away age, but okay.
Well, there were a lot of bicycle paths around there. I think that's where Lance Armstrong lives. And, I don't know how much he had to do with that, but yeah, I had, other than 3 flat tires, basically. I spent a lot of time in different tire shops.
Three flat tires in one
3,
trip.
I bought 3 tires.
On a bicycle tires or car tires?
We're talking about car tires.
Wow.
You ride along those roads, they're rocks, they're rocks, there's pieces of steel on the highway. The policeman that was helping us change the tires said that there were like 4 or 5 other cars up ahead behind us that he'd helped, and they'd lost like 2 tires. Anyway, that was my weekend.
Well, we are at 7:03,
Okay, time
so
to
we can get started whenever you're ready.
let the stragglers come in, but I don't think there are going to be many more. All right.
And we can either start with prayers or the video, whichever you prefer.
Let's do the prayers. Can you, all right. So, I mean, before the video,
Can either start with prayers or the video, whichever you prefer.
does it sound like, is there an echo in here? Anyway. All right. If y'all would like to move up one more row, that would be really cool, if you don't mind. Yeah, you can move anywhere. I used to like to just have a horseshoe, but then somebody said it's too much work. That wasn't you.
That was probably me. I mean, it's fine if
I mean,
someone
it
else
keeps it
would
a
like
little,
to get
I mean, then you,
early and
that
make
way you
that.
just, then you just have a small group. If you have 10 people, you have 10 chairs. If you have 3 people, you have 3 chairs, but it's not so, but this room is so big. All right, so we start out with the refuge and bodhicitta prayer, and this is, Linda, are you gonna show it? So, I guess I'll have to look up there.
It'll be on the other side.
Okay.
There should be a prayer book in the back of the chair.
Oh, okay. No, I'm good. What page is it on?
You want to do refuge and bodhicitta?
Yeah,
Page 34.
all right. So again, I'd like to take a little bit of time explaining things to people, because how many are y'all new to Buddhism? Y'all new to Buddhism? Pretty new? Pardon? Oh, okay. Yeah, there are people like that. A lot of them actually. So anyway, the understanding what the meaning of the prayers is otherwise, I know some people that are turned off by ritual. They think, oh, it's just empty ritual. It's just parroting words, and it's really important to understand the meaning of the words. So we're going to do the taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. So there are two things here. And then the four measurables. And one of them I'm going to really emphasize, which is compassion. And then we can do we'll just do it, the 7-limb prayer and the mandala offering. And each week I'll explain what they mean. The first prayer, does everybody see taking refuge and generating bodhicitta? Yeah. So taking refuge, there's a whole course on taking refuge. And basically, if there was a hailstorm and you were out in the middle of a field, you'd be looking for shelter. You'd be looking for some kind of protection, right? And that's sort of the attitude that we should have when we take refuge, is that we're looking for protection in a sense. And there are three attitudes that we need to bring to this particular prayer. One is, and some people don't like this word, but it's in the classical text, it's called fear of the three lower realms: the animal realm, the hungry ghost realm, and the hell realm. So that doesn't mean anything to most people. But most of us understand what it's like to have a mind that's out of control and suffering that our mind causes us, right? So we have to have some healthy sense of dread or fear. The word is they use in the scriptures actually fear. Fear. So it's the same fear that keeps us from riding 80 and it's 35 or walking across the street without. It protects us. It's a healthy kind of fear. So we need to have that. Like if we keep going in this direction, things are not going to go well. That kind of, and I dread that. I dread living out my life up to my last breath with a mind that's out of control. I dread that. That's number one. Number two is confidence. And this is something, as a new person, you wouldn't have confidence. This would be something that would come with time, usually. Unless the only exception I would say, is if you met an extraordinary holy being, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or Lama Zopa, or Kizar Rinpoche, or even Geshe Gelek. He inspires confidence. So we have to have some sort of confidence that the Buddhas, the enlightened beings, the Dharma, or their teachings, the technical term, the Sanskrit term Dharma means that which separates beings from suffering. But we're really talking here about the Buddha Dharma, and then the Sangha is the spiritual community. And sometimes it's defined as just those beings that have had a direct insight into emptiness. But as Buddhism has morphed in the West, it's like us. We're the Sangha. We come together, we practice together to support one another. And it's crucial to have all three. There are very, very few people. I mean, there are individuals that can practice alone and make great progress, but it does help to have a spiritual community to support oneself in practice. So we're taking refuge in the enlightened beings, the teachings, and it's not just the words, it's the realizations of those teachings, and then the spiritual community. So that's what we're taking refuge, when we take refuge. And again, it's dread of the living of the crazy mind. It's confidence in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, what I just spoke about. And then lastly is compassion. And that's unique. In Theravada Buddhism, Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka, places like that, they don't mention compassion as the motivation for taking refuge. But in Mahayana Tibetan Buddhism, compassion is key. And everything comes down to compassion. And we'll talk about a little bit about that today and every day, really. But that's compassion for ourselves, compassion for others. That's why we're doing this. We're taking refuge. And so you can sort of summarize, refuge is putting a safe and positive direction in our life. That's what Alex Berzon's translation. But so we're taking refuge, and the first two lines are, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. So as a Mahayana practitioner, usually, when you become a Buddha, you don't have to go to refuge because you are the source of refuge. But until you get enlightened, we need the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. That's the Sangha. So that separates us from non-Buddhists, because non-Buddhists don't go to refuge to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, right? So that distinguishes someone who doesn't practice this path versus someone who does. And then the last two lines, by my practice of giving and other perfections, those are the 6 bodhisattva perfections. Bodhisattvas are beings who have realized bodhicitta directly, and every action of their body, speech, and mind is motivated by that. And there are 6 perfections which we'll talk about, but there are things like generosity and ethics and patience, or perseverance, and then enthusiastic perseverance, and concentration and wisdom. Those are the 6 perfections. But anyway, by my practice of giving, that's generosity, and the other perfections, the other 5 perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So the last 2 lines are distinguishing someone who practices for individual liberation or nirvana. That's not, and I'm not saying this in any sort of negative way, it's just a fact that the goal of the Theravada tradition, and I've lived and practiced in Theravada monasteries in Thailand for a month and a half on one occasion, so I'll know a little bit about it. But the goal for practice is individual liberation to achieve nirvana. Nirvana is complete freedom from suffering. Okay, but this is Mahayana. So our practice is not only to achieve that. That actually is the byproduct, but we dedicate our practice to achieving enlightenment for the sake of all beings. When the game is way much bigger than just our own individual liberation, that just happens as a byproduct. It happens, but it's not the main intention. And I come back to the word intention again and again, because in the Course on Karma, and I know some of you did that, some maybe you don't know, everybody hears the word karma and thinks they know what it means, but it's big, it's a big term. And the key feature that determines whether an action is positive, i.e. leads to happiness, or negative, i.e. leads to suffering, is your intention. And we kind of use the word motivation, intention interchangeably here. But the most magnanimous motivation is to help others. And since others are infinite, it's like the most amazing motivation that you could have. I mean, obviously, it's a motivation. If it could have been done, it would have been done. But it's an attitude that a bodhisattva has. So we're going to read this first stanza. First 2 lines, distinguishing non-Buddhists from Buddhists. Second 2 lines, distinguishing people who practice for individual liberation versus the Mahayana motivation, which is to liberate all beings from suffering, including ourselves. All right, so we'll do that. And then we'll do the 4 measurables: is immeasurable love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And then the 7-limb prayer, which each one of those lines is an antidote to some negative mind state. And then the short mandala offering, we imagine that that's like we're offering a universe of jewels and everything valuable and wonderful because we really, really, really want these teachings. Maybe you don't feel that way yet. Maybe someday you will. But back in the good old days, people used to really would travel thousands of miles and bring great offerings to these teachers who had these wonderful teachings that could stop their suffering. So that's the context of the Manda offering. So there is a whole story behind that, but we won't go into it. All right, so we'll start out by doing refuge and bodhicitta together. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness, causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. And then the Mandal offering again. Lama Yeshe used to say, imagine like you're offering everything in a mall, like Crabtree Valley Mall or something. Just the best of the best, whatever it is. Actually, South Point would be the best mall now. All right, so we'll do this. And this is kind of symbolic. This is sort of a hand mudra. That's what they call a mudra. And it symbolizes the universe. It symbolizes Crabtree Valley Mall. Everything that's wonderful and good that people want. We're offering everything up to the teachers, to the holy gurus, requesting them to teach, basically. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamnya Yatayami. Okay. So tonight we're going to, just as a way of introduction, my name's Don Brown. I think I know most people here. Pardon?
My name is Suzanne.
Suzanne? Thank you. Kenny and Suzanne. Well, why don't everybody go around the room, because I've already been introduced to most people, but go ahead and introduce yourself. How do you spell it? A-D-E, Ade. Suzanne, and then the people that are online, they don't have to do it because they're not here. Jiva. And Chris, Linda's Linda, everybody knows this by now that comes, but Linda sort of runs the Discovering Buddhism, and Chris runs everything actually. He's the guy, he's like the atlas that holds the universe up. The Kadampa Center Universe, anyway, he's been working here as a volunteer for so many years, and we really appreciate him and all that he's done over the years. So let's listen. If we can fast forward, at least get to, past the musical part. I think Richard Gere has something good to say. I mean, I think he's the one that does the, he talked a little bit about bodhicitta, if we can get it. Most people know who Richard Gere is. He's a movie star, but he's been connected to the Dalai Lama for many years, and Lama's Zopa as well. Yeah, well, let's go to him, because he's
real compassion comes from seeing the suffering of others, and you feel a sense of responsibility. You want to do something for them. The more we care for the happiness of others, the greater is our own sense of well-being. In Buddhism, this attitude of wishing to give ultimate benefit to others as much as possible is called bodhicitta. It's the heart of Buddhist practice. Now, we all know an eye for an eye only makes the world blind. We hear this wisdom, but how can we really practice it? Buddha taught accessible methods for how to transform every heart, no matter how wounded, into one that only thinks of benefiting others. Join us as we learn how to develop this profound compassion.
At the beginning of each of our teachings, we have been setting an appropriate motivation. That motivation has been the wish to achieve enlightenment in order to be able to benefit all living beings and lead them to enlightenment as well. This intention, this wish, is actually the mind of bodhicitta and is known also as the mind of enlightenment. Now, bodhicitta is an attitude that is progressively developed, step by step. And the very first step in that process of development is generating an appropriate motivation, a strong motivation for practice. And so before listening to these teachings, in your mind, make a strong determination to be able as quickly as possible to reach the state of Buddhahood, not for yourself alone, but in order to benefit all living beings.
So once you have that kind of true understanding of the nature of suffering with relation to one's own existence, then you extend that understanding, that recognition towards all other sentient beings and reflect upon their status as suffering beings, and then cultivate the wish that just as you yourself wish to attain freedom from the suffering, so too all of these sentient beings wish to be free from suffering. And so in that way you cultivate a great compassion and the wish that all sentient beings enjoy happiness, which is the freedom from suffering. That is the loving kindness. So on the basis of compassion that wishes others to be free of suffering, loving kindness that wishes others to enjoy happiness, then you cultivate a sense of a special responsibility. Therefore, your compassion does not remain simply at the level of wish or aspiration, but rather it generates a sense of commitment and responsibility that I shall liberate all beings from suffering. And this kind of extraordinary sense of responsibility will lead to the eventual realization of bodhicitta, which is the altruistic intention, aspiring to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. The bodhicitta is like the central axle of the Mahayana path. So therefore, it is this factor of bodhicitta which determines whether or not you are within the fold or outside the fold of the Bodhisattva practitioners. So if you lack the bodhicitta, this altruistic intention, no matter how other powerful practices that you may have, such as the realization of emptiness, even direct realization of emptiness, or even nirvana that you may have attained, none of these practices become the conduct of a bodhisattva. When you have the quality of bodhicitta, realization of bodhicitta, then even a simple act of virtue, such as feeding the ants, giving food to the ants, which may seem a kind of an insignificant activity, but because of your bodhicitta motivation, this altruistic intention, even these simple acts are transformed into conditions for attainment of full enlightenment. And so in a way, it is like an elixir that transforms base metals into gold.
I think answer for everything. Answer for everything. I think that's the compassion, bodhicitta. Purpose of my life is not just to achieve happiness for myself, free myself from my own problems, sufferings. Purpose of my life is to benefit others, other sentient beings who are numberless. So I must free them from all the suffering causes and bring them to enlightenment. So when you generate this thought, this attitude of the bodhicitta, total benefit of others, so it brings so much peace, contentment, fulfilling in your heart. Makes your life so happy. So usually there's two ways to develop bodhicitta. One technique to develop bodhicitta is through 7 techniques of mind, cause, and effect. So you meditate how all the sentient beings have been your mother and the kind. You see, give body, and then numberless kindness. You see, that protected one's own life from dangers. The numberless kindness gave education, numberless kindness, bears so much hardship for one's own happiness. That they, when they've been one's mother, and bears, so much hardship, suffers so much, for to take care of oneself, for one's own well-being, for one's own happiness. So, like that, you see. Then, so this is how you meditate in that technique, you see, the mother and the kind, So then you see, you feel so very precious. So this way, when you feel everybody being mother and kind, you feel very warm to you, see, kind of beauty. You see, it's not talking about beauty of the body. You see, the kindness, being kind. mind. So you see other sentient beings are suffering, like something being samsara, suffering. So wish others to be free from suffering, cause of the suffering, and you want to do that. You see. So that there's a when you take the responsibility on yourself, to cause happiness to others, that's the mahana, the loving kindness. And this is my turn. This is my turn is to help them. So I must free them from all. You see, I will free them from all the sentient beings, with all the sentient beings without exception, from all the suffering and causes, bring them to enlightenment by myself alone. So you take the full responsibility on yourself. Then, the success of that, there's no other way except first myself to achieve enlightenment. So that when that thought rises naturally, day and night, you see, without any effort, just while you are, eating, walking, this thought naturally rises. Like the you see, mother whose child fell in the fire or drowned, you see, in the river or you see, oceans, something like that. Then mother, while she's eating, while she's walking all the time, constantly she think of that child to save. You see, that without any effort, just couldn't. So like that is taught to, and then you see, so like that you see, taught to achieve enlightenment. To free the sentient beings from all the suffering causes and bring them to enlightenment. So that time, the one has a realization bodhicitta. So, but without bodhicitta, we can't achieve enlightenment. So you can see now clear, without compassion, cannot achieve enlightenment yourself, and cannot enlighten. You see, cannot liberate all the sentient beings from all the sufferings and bring them to enlightenment. Cannot be perfect to the sentient beings. So therefore, it's now here the compassion is the most important thing in the life.
Is going to talk about a practice called Tonglen, which we'll get a chance to do some practice. This is one of the methods to develop bodhicitta.
One of these verses of bodhicitta in the training says, this chronic disease of constantly cherishing oneself, of the chronic disease of egoism, it is actually the cause of all the unwanted circumstances. Having recognized that this is the one to blame for all the shortcomings, bless me so I might be able to eliminate this self-grasping, the practice of Tonglen, of taking and giving. This is an incredible powerful practice, incredible powerful meditation, and the immediate result, good result that you have on training your mind on the basis of Tonglen is that you will be able to develop a very uncommon, powerful courage. You become really brave-hearted, very brave, so brave that that nothing will be able to shake you anymore. You become as brave as being that kind of courage that you are sure you can take upon yourself the burden of all sentient beings, and you're able to give to all sentient beings whatever they need from yourself alone. So it means that once you have acquired so much courage by training your mind, you won't be harmed by delusions anymore. Delusion arise in your mind, but you'll be able to conquer them right away. So once you have given, once you mentally you have trained of giving, of being able to give, yourself to others to that extent, the quality of your happiness will increase will increase tremendously. Is actually the best happiness you can find. If something happens to you when you have trained your mind so much with this meditation of giving, and taking upon yourself the sufferings of sentient beings and giving out whatever goodness you have, you cannot experience anymore any loss, because mentally you have given it already. So instead of encountering sufferings upon having losses, you actually your mind becomes happier and happier. The actual meditation on taking and giving is as you should try to meditate in this way. So first of all, you just visualize yourself surrounded by all sentient beings. Then you should begin gradually. First begin with yourself. You think of your own sufferings first. The sufferings of today, the sufferings of tomorrow, the suffering of this life, the sufferings you might and then increase it with the suffering of future life and so forth, until you are comfortable accepting your own sufferings ripening upon yourself. Then slowly move over to your parents, move over to your parents, move over to your kids, move over to your husband or to your wife, to your family. And then you move over, once you're comfortable with that, you increase with all your friends. Once you're comfortable with that, you increase with all your enemies. And once you're comfortable with that, you increase with all the strangers, all the human beings. Then once you're comfortable with that, you increase with all the animals, and so on and so forth. You gradually build up the strength of your courage and your meditation until you're able to embrace all sentient beings. The meditation of taking and giving. In Tibetan, actually, Stonglen means giving and taking, but from the point of view of the practice, you first take and then give. You first take upon yourself and then you give out. So once you have this, on the basis of this feeling of compassion, begin to think that all these sufferings, the sufferings of the hell beings, of cold and heat, the sufferings of hunger and thirst, of the predators and so on, each of them, for each sentient beings, think that they come out of these sentient beings like a huge black cloud. And in the nature is the sufferings of the sentient beings and the causes, all those non-virtuous actions which bring as a result that type of suffering, and they just ripen on you. They just absorb right in the center of the heart, where the self-cherishing thought stays, right there, and destroys it. They think that it ripens completely everything on yourself. And by doing this, think that I'm freeing all my mother sentient beings from their sufferings. They're ripening upon me right now. Therefore, from now on, all my mother sentient beings, they will dwell in the irreversible happiness, and I myself alone am doing this. So generate a great joy at the end of your meditation of having been able to do and being able to do so. So at this point, once you have taken in this way gradually, then it is a moment of giving. Giving is done, taking is done on the basis of great compassion, wanting all sentient beings to be free from suffering. This is the meaning of compassion. So now you give with love. What is the meaning of love? Love, the wish of all sentient beings to be happy, to possess all their happiness, temporary and ultimate happiness that they wish for, in accordance with their desire, exactly as they desire. By using your breath with your visualization, mounting it with love and compassion to give and to take, it becomes quite powerful and a quick method to realize the mind of enlightenment.
there's no question in my mind that bodhicitta is the root of all, the foundation of all practices. Without bodhicitta, none of it makes any sense. It doesn't have any power to it. There's no juice to it. No, from my experience, there's no transformative effect to meditation without developing compassion. It becomes a bit dry and ineffectual. And it creates a kind of cool detachment, which I don't think was the purpose of the Buddha's work. Ultimately, the work that is achieved through the various practices is to break down all barriers. And there's no more tangible one than breaking down the barriers to having a compassionate, open heart to all beings, insects and enemies included. To begin to approach a new kind of relationship with them, to me, really is the beginning of practice. There's a very powerful practice, that simple practice, that I started using years and years and years ago. And it was simply every creature that I met, whether it was a person, an insect, whatever it may be, the first thought that I allowed myself to generate towards that other being was, I wish you happiness. Very simple thing, but make sure that the very first thought you have is, I wish you happiness. And how that totally transforms what happens after that point with this other person. This is my own experience. I see this very clearly. Now, sometimes it's extremely difficult. You're faced with an enemy. You're faced with an immediate physical situation where something is in your face. It becomes very difficult. That's where the meditative process of being able to stop the arisal of an afflictive emotion becomes really important. That there is an immediate space that you can create where you can see it arise. And before it actually takes you over, you're able to transform it. Okay, see it for what it is. That this is ignorance being manifest. This anger is nothing more than ignorance. From my side and their side. Transform it, let it go. Transform it, turn it into love. I wish you happiness. If you just try that, what an extraordinary difference everything makes.
Giving birth is an amazing experience, and for me the pain was so intense that it really allowed my mind to focus in a way that I very rarely, if ever, can otherwise. And so during the process of birth, when a contraction would come and it would just be so intense and so painful, that was really the only time I've ever been able to practice Tonglen in a way that I felt like it was really powerful, and it was really affecting my mind, and it was the only thing that allowed my mind to get through that process. Because if I would freak out and lose concentration for a minute, the pain would just be so overwhelming I couldn't handle it. But then if I could just think of all the others out there who had either experienced that kind of pain in similar situations, or the numerous other kinds of pain that people are experiencing all the time, and I could think of trying to take on their suffering and to experience it and take it away from them in what I was feeling, it somehow helped to keep it much more focused, and it helped to keep it bearable. I got a tiny taste during that process of how powerful Tonglen can be, and how amazing, like if you really practice that all the time, and or as a regular daily practice even, it would just change how you viewed the world so much. And then I think as a parent, you start to get a little opportunity to do that in the waking time. It's probably in practice, in being around my daughter, that's probably the only time really that I'll have a desire and she'll have an opposing desire, and I'll give in and do what she needs before I'll do what I need. And so it's nice to see that. And it's amazing to imagine what it would be like to have that feeling towards every other being, on the planet. And you can see some of these teachers that do have that feeling towards every being on the planet, and it's amazing.
So, let's see. Mark, what do you think about that? I'm picking on you. Yeah.
I guess as Richard Gere said, it has a lot of juice.
A lot of what?
Juice.
A lot of juice. Okay. So say more, what do you mean by that?
A lot of food for thought. Gets the mind turning.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I also heard him, when I heard what he said too, I think, that it, sometimes Lama Zopa will say things like, without bodhicitta and without some really profound relationship with a teacher, particularly, that the Dharma is like eating saltines. There's no moisture there. It's hard, it doesn't taste good. If you're just practicing meditation without compassion, you can become detached and really not connect with people. So compassion, from Lama Zopa's comments, is the key. And it's not just compassion, it's really easy. I want to talk about that too. I think it's on my list to do here. Let's talk about bodhicitta first. Bodhicitta, the word bodhicitta means awakening mind. Bodhi means awaken, chitta means mind. The awakening mind. Also called the mind of enlightenment. In this little handout that I gave everyone, the last in the last paragraph, there was we'll read it in just a minute, talked about stabilize your awakening mind. So this is a big deal, If people really got what a big deal it is, the room should be full. But I don't think people, it's like, I remember there was a great teacher. He was one of Lama Yeshe's gurus and Lama Zopa's gurus. His name was Geshe Sopa. He lived in Madison, Wisconsin. And this is many years ago, like in the 80s. And I talked to him and I said, we're trying to generate some interest in, anyway, I was in Buddhism and in North Carolina and with much going on. And he said, people just need to get that this is, everybody has dreams of wanting to be happy and wanting to have a peaceful life, a great attitude, and die with peace of mind and with no regrets. Everybody wants that. It's like, you want to make your dreams come true, then the Dharma, the Buddha Dharma is the method to do that. That's obviously a claim that, our teachers have made. And now it's up to us to prove it. Lama Yeshe, again, he's my refuge guru, but also he's like the founder of the FPMT. This particular center is part of a family of centers worldwide. And he said, look, it's up to you to prove that the Dharma is accurate by putting it into practice and seeing if it works. If it doesn't work for you, then leave it alone. Let it go, but give it a chance. Immerse yourself in it. Give it a chance to see if it makes a difference. And I wanted to make a comment about developing compassion, because the kind of compassion that His Holiness was talking about and that we're talking about here is there's ordinary compassion, which is the wish that you could be free of suffering, and that's something that who do we usually have compassion for?
Our children.
Yeah, people that we're close to, pretty much. Strangers, no, not so much. Enemies, Absolutely not. It's more like, may you suffer, may you suffer more. They're suffering, but, you know, we don't have compassion for them because we don't connect with their suffering. And yet the whole, you know, this is the big part of bodhicitta is, you know, we want to become enlightened to liberate universal living beings, everybody, excluding nobody. You know, of course, family and loved ones are crucial. I mean, that's a big part of our practice, particularly in day-to-day practice. But the attitude that we want to develop is this attitude of universal compassion that excludes nobody. Well, to do that, we have to create level ground. This is called the foundation for the development of this palace of bodhicitta, which is called equanimity, where we develop through meditation, because this doesn't come naturally. It doesn't. I mean, ordinarily we cling to the friends, those people that say and do the things that we like. You know, they get the label friend, and we generally have an attachment to them. And then the strangers, which is the vast majority of living beings, you know, just take the human beings, but forget about the animals and so forth. They're all strangers, vast majority of strangers, and normally we feel indifference toward them. And then the people that we label enemies, we feel aversion toward, right? So, like I said, when they suffer, because we don't like them, or we have some resistance to them, some aversion toward them, when they suffer, we don't really care. In fact, we might even wish them more suffering. So that's not a good attitude. That's not what we want to do. Is develop an attitude of that excludes no one. Now you might go, well, that's ridiculous because it's impossible. And then you can. So if you feel that way, you can get up and leave now. But because it's normal to feel that way. Actually, if it could have been done, it would have been done. So it's an attitude that we want to open ourselves up to. The Dalai Lama, when he talks about compassion in general, he talks about it's compassionate self-interest is one of the terms he uses. In other words, by our having compassion for universal living beings, it benefits us. It opens our heart and mind. It has a healing effect on us. So it seems like we know we're practicing to become enlightened, to benefit all sentient beings, and we know we're going to benefit from that. Because we're always, up until we reach a very advanced place on this path, we're always going to be motivated by some little bit of self-interest, right? And that's okay, But it's enlightened self-interest when we do things for others, when we help alleviate suffering and make others happy. So that's a big deal. And then to talk about compassion, what do you need? What's the definition of compassion again? Does anybody remember? Some of you people that have been in DB.
The wish to...
No, you can't answer all these questions. All right, let's see. Have you
Anyone
been
online? Rebecca. Oh, Mark, can you run the microphone?
Rebecca's got the answer. She's got an answer.
Okay, so I'm going to go off of what Linda was starting with. The wish for others' happiness. The wish for others' happiness and the wish for that others not suffer.
Yeah. So that's, and that's a good point. In a way, we really define compassion as the wish that others could be free from suffering and its causes, right? And love, again, the Buddhist definition, is made with the wish that others could be happy and have the causes of happiness. But that's not, saying those words, that's not love, is it? Love is literally a visceral experience. It's a feeling, it goes on, if that experience, like when you're with your child, and you want them to be happy, if you could give that feeling words, it would say, may you be happy and have the causes of happiness. That's what love would speak. Those are the words that love would speak. And if someone that we felt connected to and loved was suffering, when we saw that suffering, we would, the experience that we'd have, again, giving words to that experience of compassion is, may you be free of suffering and its causes. May you be free of suffering and its causes. So that, again, those words don't get to the point of that but it's pointing at something, isn't it? It's pointing to something that's really important. And so in Buddhism, we spend a lot of time, and I don't want to go into it. Actually I do, because in the Four Noble Truths, anybody remember what they were? The first thing the Buddha taught. Terry, what do you remember anything? The Four Noble Truths. What are they?
That suffering is something that's universal. Everyone suffers. And it's not anyway.
Yeah.
That there is a way to get out of suffering. And then
That's the third one.
Oh, that's the third one. I skipped one, didn't I? Because then the fourth one is, here's the way.
Yeah, the path.
The 15.
Yeah. So the second one is the cause, right?
Right.
So the Buddha is basically saying we're all sick. Everybody's ill. Everybody's sick. Everybody's sick with the disease of suffering, or dukkha is a Sanskrit word. And so if you're going to develop compassion, you have to recognize dukkha. You have to recognize it in yourself, and you have to recognize that it's not just me and you experiencing it, but it's a universal experience. So it's important. So in the beginning in Buddhism, we spend a lot of time, and Buddhism gets a bad rap for this, but you can't develop compassion if you don't recognize suffering. If you don't recognize that everybody suffers all the time, 24/7, there's always this nagging. Lama Zopa used to say it's the worst suffering of samsara. It's like we're never good enough. It's never going to be enough. Something's missing. We're never satisfied. It's kind of like low-level radiation. He said that's the worst suffering of all, and we all have that, and it gets worse. Well, it's just the human condition. So let's look at the the big ones that the Buddha talked about in the Four Noble Truths, or the suffering of birth, right? When he left his palatial environment, I guess he was already pretty much aware about the suffering of birth. Like when you get born, but nowadays people get born by C-sections, but back in the old days, everybody came through the vaginal canal, and that was tough. And then, of course, you spend 9 months in a little tight compartment called your uterus, but I guess you get used to that. But there's the suffering of birth, the suffering of sickness, the suffering of aging and old age, and then finally death. Those are the four biggies. But then in between is the suffering of and this one's interesting. is having to suffer over and over and over again. There's no end to it. There's no end to it. We suffer again and again and again. Just when we get, wow, thank God that's over. And then boom, another problem is just queuing up. So, and again, it's dissatisfied mind, never satisfied, always wanting, wanting, wanting. Ajahn Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, this great Thai Buddhist monk, saint actually, wonderful teacher, he said, we're addicted to deliciousness. We're addicted to deliciousness. And here's the problem with addiction to anything. When you don't have it, are you happy? When you don't have the junk? No. When you do have it, you know it's not going to last. So you can't really take single-minded enjoyment in whatever pleasurable experience we have, our addiction to deliciousness. And then when we have the opposite, or when we lose it, or even have the opposite, which might be pain, we suffer even more. So there's no time when we can say, hey, it's over. Well, that's not true, because all of this comes from the mind. All of this comes from the mind. Birth, sickness, aging, and death are just realities. Meeting leads to parting is a reality. High position leads to low position. That's a reality. All composite things must separate into their parts. That's a reality. We get born, this is again, you have to creatively align with rebirth if you want to buy this one, but we're born and we're born and die again and again and again and again and again. And Jeffrey Hopkins, who's this Buddhist scholar in Virginia for many years and used to translate for the Dalai Lama, he gave a teaching one time, and he said, if you could take all of your former skeletons, just to give you a visual here, of your previous bodies, it would dwarf Mount Everest. That's how many lives we've taken, and how many lifetimes we've had over and over and over again, and never could achieve nirvana or enlightenment. And we could never be free from this cycle of uncontrolled causation that we call samsara. So, so high position leads to low position, meeting leads to parting, we're never satisfied, and so on. So we have to understand that it's just not us. When we look into the eyes of the people that we care about, and the people that are on the elevators and that in crowds and stuff like that, we don't think that they're suffering. They're not saying, hey, I'm suffering. But if we open to the reality that this is the human condition, it's really, really important if we want to develop compassion. If we don't understand that everybody is always suffering or experiencing some form of dissatisfaction or dukkha or what's Gaelic I like to call it?
Complications.
Complications. That's really dumbing it down, but you get the point. So it's important. It's important for us to. So that's one of the great values in meditating and thinking about dukkha or suffering, is because not only is the key for us to develop compassion, but it's also we're identifying that which we can get beyond, because the suffering has to do with the mind. Being born doesn't necessarily. Being born, getting sick, getting old, and dying, and all these other things that happen in between, flat tires in Austin, and problems at work, and problems with family, those situations. In other words, pain and suffering are not the same thing. we could experience pain, and mental and physical pain, and not suffer. Because suffering has to do with our mind and the way we interpret situations. You know, your spouse runs off with somebody else, you know, and you go, oh, this is the worst thing that ever happened, you know, and at that moment it certainly feels that way. But then when we stop and look at it, it's our mind. You know, why couldn't we say, this is a hard one, this one's a stretch, but why couldn't we say, gosh, I'm so happy for her. She's found somebody she loves, that she can enjoy herself with. And you know, I should rejoice in her good fortune of finding, or hopefully somebody that's better than me. You know, they say that's one of the antidotes to jealousy is rejoicing. Why couldn't we do that? But normally we go, oh, this is the worst thing that could ever happen. So so suffering is when we look at our situation in life, I think most people would come down to the realization that the real cause of our suffering is our mind. It's our mind. You could be sick. I've seen people who are sick, you know. I mean, we've all seen people who are sick. Some people who are sick with exactly the same diseases. Some people are able to handle sickness with such courage, you know. And, you know, I've had patients who were sick, and people I remember this preacher used to see, this was a VA hospital, he used to come see this guy, and I was talking to the preacher, and I said, how's it going? He says, great. He said, I always feel better when I come see him. He makes me feel better. And on the other hand, we know people that we probably had this experience ourselves, where we suffer, and how much of it is the pain or the discouraging, the bad part about being sick is made worse by a bad attitude. I can't stand it, I hate it, I got to get rid of it, and so on and so forth. So our attitude, our ability to be able to be with whatever experience we're having, be in the moment with that experience, without adding aversion to it, is a huge benefit, huge benefit. So getting back to, now I mentioned compassion and empathy here too. I wanted to distinguish those two. This is...
Don, before you move to the next thing, there's a couple of questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Don, on Zoom, you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, okay. This is just a small kind of technical question. In the video, at the end of the video, they introduced the term Tong Len.
Mm-hmm.
Is that just another way of expressing bodhicitta, a practice of bodhicitta, or are there other implications to that term?
Good question. All right, so Tonglen, it is translated as giving and taking, although some teachers say that you should take and then give. But anyway, it's basically what we're doing. You remember, we talked about how bodhicitta is developed in stages, like there's a series of meditation or contemplations that we do and the final contemplation, the conclusion is that I must become enlightened in order to liberate all sentient beings. That's actually bodhicitta. But this practice of Tonglen is a big part of that, because Tonglen's based on love and compassion. So when honestly, I've mentioned this before, but it reminds me a little bit of Jesus on the cross, I was raised Presbyterian back in the day, and I remember, he's thinking, I'm taking on the suffering of the world, and I'm giving back like everlasting life, I'm taking on the suffering of the world, and I'm giving back everlasting life. Well, in Tonglen, Usually you start out Tonglen practice with yourself, and you imagine, you visualize yourself and whatever suffering that you're experiencing now, and you will experience in the future. Because we're all going to get sick, we'll get older, we're going to die. Okay, we're definitely going to have those, and many things in between. We imagine that in the form of black smoke, and we take it into our heart, and it destroys the self-cherishing attitude that's in the center of our chest. So that's wishing myself, may I be free of suffering and its causes. That's compassion, isn't it? And I'm actually doing a visualization practice where I'm imagining I'm taking black smoke, and it literally, I'm not going to go into any detail tonight, but literally we imagine that black smoke as all of my suffering comes in through my nostrils, goes down to my heart, and destroys the self-cherishing mind at the heart, and completely fills me with light. And then I wish myself to be happy, and I imagine I send out white light. And I imagine that white light is, I'm bathed and infused by white light, the white light of happiness. And then we do it again. We practice taking suffering and giving happiness. So we're practicing compassion and loving kindness. Compassion and loving kindness. We start with ourselves, and then we go, it's much better to do this with people you care about, right? Because compassion will not arise very easily unless you've done this equanimity meditation very well. So we start with people that we already care about, like our family members and our parents and whatever, and we gradually expand it. I think of my children, may they be free of suffering. I imagine the suffering that they're having now in the form of black cloud, black smoke, and I bring it into my heart. May they be free of suffering. And you can say those words, but you don't have to. You can just imagine that the black smoke is their suffering coming into your heart, destroying your selfishness, your self-cherishing selfishness, completely destroyed, and you're filled with the light of love, and you send that light out, to your children. May they have happiness and the causes of happiness. You practice that again. Compassion, loving kindness. Compassion, loving kindness. And then you expand that to maybe some people that you're more neutral about, maybe your co-workers, and then you expand it out to people in the community that maybe you don't even know. And then you can gradually expand it out to people that you, actually, one of the things Rupa Rinpoche said was, before you get too far out there, use your enemies. He said, take the people that you dislike, that you feel aversion toward, and work with them before you go to the universal living beings, because that's kind of vague. But the people that you feel aversion toward, and so you can go back, you can imagine that person there, or group of people, and let's say it's a person, somebody who said something that hurt your feelings or harmed a friend of yours or somebody you feel aversion toward. And you imagine them now, and you have to have developed at least a feeling of equanimity or caring for you to, this is ridiculous to think. You can't feel compassion for people you hate. It's impossible, I think. Might be possible. But it's, without being able to develop that equanimous mind of equal regard for everyone. And so let's look at the enemy, the person that the so-called we feel aversion toward. There are certain analytical things. I mean, we can think, well, that's just a label. I mean, that person said something that I didn't like, or they harmed me in some way, and now they become an enemy. It's just a label. We've all had enemies that have become friends, and we've had plenty of us that have had friends that have become enemies, right? So they're very changeable. It's not a fixed label. And then we go back and we think, okay, where did this enemy come from? Well, it came from my own former actions, because that's what creates my reality, is karma. What goes around comes around. So something that I did, motivated by self-cherishing selfishness, planted the seed for this karma to ripen in the form of this person mistreating me or doing something that I don't like. So Shantideva says, and wrote the Bodhisattva Charavatar, he says, if somebody hits you with a stick, you don't get mad at the stick, you get angry at the person who's wielding the stick. Well, the person who's mistreating you is the stick. The real wielder of the stick is our own selfish, self-cherishing mind that created the karma in the first place. This person that's harming us is just part of this karmic loop that we started by actions motivated by ignorance and by self-cherishing ignorance. So, and then how do you develop patience? Remember there are these bodhisattvas, 6 perfections, there's generosity and ethics and patience and so forth. How do you develop? Patience is one of the 6 bodhisattva perfections. Without the perfection of patience, there's no Buddhas. There are no bodhisattvas, and then there are no enlightened beings. So we have to develop patience. How do we develop patience? Do we develop patience and dependence upon our friends? Heck no. Because mostly they just tell us what we want to hear. That's why we call them friends. It's the tough guys, the people who push our buttons, the difficult situations that we encounter. It doesn't have to be a person, but generally, in this context, we're talking about people. It's the difficult people who teach us patience. So there's another reason where I might not see this person as being totally negative. All right? It's a label. Right? It's just merely labeled based on something that happened. It's a karmic fruition of a past action that I created, and they're teaching me patient endurance. They are the cause of my enlightenment. If I ever become a bodhisattva and develop patience, patient endurance, and the perfection of patience, it will be in dependence upon difficult people like this. Wow. How lucky we are to have people like that in our lives that push our buttons. And so with that kind of analytical meditation or contemplation, now we can see this person in front of us we felt aversion toward. Maybe we can begin to work and see that they, imagine that they're suffering. Well, when they harmed me, that was not the action of somebody that's happy. They must be miserable. And not only that, they just created the karmic cause to suffer some more, which is even sort of sad. And they're just like I am. They're deluded. They're self-centered. They've all experienced birth. They all have experienced birth, and will experience sickness, aging, and death. And all the other things that sentient beings in samsara experience, they're just like I am. And they want to be happy. They don't want to suffer. But they just do it in a weird way. They make mistakes, just like I do. So we imagine the enemy, and at least try to get to the point of equal regard for this person instead of hatred. And we imagine their suffering. And we imagine that comes in our hearts in the form of black smoke, right? Taking, all right? Destroying self-cherishing, filling us with light, and then giving this white light of love and love. So may you be free of suffering and its causes, taking on their suffering in the form of black smoke to our heart, and then destroying self-cherishing. We give them happiness and its causes, and we imagine that they actually get it. We imagine that we actually are able to take away their suffering and give them destroying our selfishness, by taking us, because that's the exact last thing our self-centered, egocentric self wants to do, isn't it? Is take on somebody else's suffering, particularly somebody we don't like. So that's the antidote. We're destroying our biggest enemy, which is self-cherishing selfishness, when we do this. So again, this is how we practice. We start out, again, with ourselves, those that we're close to, enemies, and then universal living beings. And we can start out universal living beings just in Cary or Raleigh or Wake County. And then we can expand to, the whole country, the whole planet. And then we can also expand to animals and, sentient beings. And then Buddhism even posits, different universes and beings in different places that's not hard to imagine. This is a vast place. Why wouldn't there be other places where there are sentient beings? Although we don't have evidence for it yet. Elon, give him time. He'll figure it out. But so anyway, that's the key. That's a really big point. Bodhichitta, developing this universal, the sense of universal compassion, depends upon understanding suffering, doesn't it? And this practice of Tonglen is getting us in the mindset of wanting to take on that responsibility of freeing all living beings from suffering, and the method to accomplish that is one's own enlightenment. To free all sentient beings from suffering, I must get enlightened. And we have to do it just one little step at a time. Every day we get up and we make that intention, by the grace of the three jewels, I didn't die last night. I'm so fortunate to be a human being again today in the practice of Dharma. From now on, I'm going to give happiness to all sentient beings with compassion and love. That's what Lama Zopa asks us to say every day, and I'll remember it once in a while. But again, how many of us start our day with that attitude? But it's such a powerful attitude, so different than our egocentric attitude. Now, what do you think the difference is between empathy? Let's define these terms, because we've defined compassion is the spontaneous wish that beings could be free of suffering and its causes. What's empathy? Is it the same thing? Because what is empathy? I feel your pain. Yeah.
That's what I think. Feeling somebody's pain, being in their shoes.
Yeah, walking a mile in their shoes, right. Like feeling like you're over there, like, wow, how, yeah, I feel your pain. So it's not the same thing. And they did a study at the university. By the way, I just finished reading a book. I'm almost embarrassed to tell you the name of it. It's called Against Empathy. A Case for Rational Compassion, written by a Yale University professor, and his last name is Bloom. But I think empathy does have a lot of utility in certain situations. I'm not poo-pooing empathy completely. Really, I'm not saying that at all, but it's not the same thing as compassion, right? So we need to be able to make that distinction, because a lot of evil is done in this world in the name of empathy. You can be, a lot of sociopaths score really high on the empathic scale, because they can understand the minds of other people. They know what it's like to feel like they do and look like they do, and they take advantage of them. It's not necessarily always a good thing. I even heard of a story of, I think it was in Thailand, it was in Laos. I think in Laos, there was an orphanage, and they took pictures of these orphans, and they would shoot them out to people in the on television, and particularly in the wealthy Western countries, and then people would start sending thousands and thousands of dollars to these orphanages for these children. Well, what did the people that own the orphanages start doing? What? They made a lot of money, but what did they start doing? What do you think they started doing?
Spend it on themselves.
They started going, they started going to, they snatched kids up and brought them back to to build up the orphanage, to have more kids at the orphanage, to make it, so they were pulling on the heartstrings of the people who had money, who said, oh, I couldn't imagine if that was my child, I would want my, like putting yourself in that child's place or the parent of that child's place. But, pulling on the empathic heartstrings ended up backfiring in terms of helping. So it's, in Buddhism, they do talk about the importance of having compassion with wisdom. And I'll kind of end on this note. Buddhism, the two wings of the bird of enlightenment are compassion and wisdom. And so we have to have wisdom. And I'm not saying that empathy is always and forever a bad thing, but compassion is not empathy. It's the wish that beings could be free of suffering and its causes. One last thing. Got a minute? Yeah. They did a study at the University of Wisconsin. I mentioned this a second ago. Richard Davidson, and I can't think of the guy's name. He's a Buddhist monk, he's a neuroscientist, blah, blah, blah. And they did a study with a bunch of people, and they were fairly new. They weren't established meditators necessarily. And they gave them some contemplations to do to cultivate compassion, and then another group, contemplations to do to cultivate empathy. All right? And then they asked them what their experience was afterwards. And the people who had been cultivating compassion actually felt uplifted by that experience. And the people that felt that were, doing the contemplations to develop empathy, feeling with their suffering, again, they didn't do so well. There was actually discomfort. And so one of the takeaways was that people that are too empathic have a much higher burnout rate. And we had one night, a few years ago, we would bring in this subject up, and there was a lady who had worked like 35 years in the NICU, a neonatal intensive care unit. And she said that was exactly right on the money. She'd seen it so many times, where you have to be able, you want your surgeon to be able to look at you and say, I want you to be free of suffering, not to be on some empathic, and be be sort of, well, I don't want to say it. I mean, you know what I'm saying. I don't know what the words are, but you want your surgeon not to be like feeling weepy and not on the top of their game when they're operating on you. And compassion would make any surgeon a better surgeon. Yeah.
I think this question may be bigger for like another discussion, like another time. But the question I have is, if I'm thinking about the suffering of anyone, and I'm bringing in the black smoke of their suffering from their entire lives and quantum timelines, as an empath, I probably don't have the skills to like separate my emotions from that black smoke of suffering.
Yeah.
So what recommendations do you have in that case?
Well, I think it's going to be, I don't know I'll just give you the answer that I've heard. And I think it sort of makes sense. You work with what you can work with, and in the beginning, that's why we work with ourselves. And even that might be too much, because we're not really we can't go back and take away the suffering of the past, because that's past. But we know that we have obstacles, we have challenges ahead. And so there will be future suffering. So we imagine what that is, what's that going to look like, and that in the form of black smoke, and then we bring it on ourselves.
When we bring it in, or we're taking in
Right.
the black smoke of suffering, how do we remove ourselves from the emotions that go along with that?
Well,
or detach ourselves?
yeah, I mean,
I'm
I
assuming
think,
you're not to feel all of the emotions of the suffering of what you're experiencing from others.
yeah, I mean, see, when I'm taking on my own suffering or my children's suffering, it actually makes me feel good that I'm taking it onto me. I would rather me suffer than them. So it actually, I don't have that experience, but some people might. And I think it's a good question because in Buddhism, not every practice, not every meditation is going to hit, going to work. And sometimes you have to start at baby steps, something very simple.
So are you telling me when you think about the suffering of your children, it doesn't make you sad?
When I think about their suffering, it makes me a little sad, but when I take it away from them, it makes me happy.
I understand. I think that.
And then when I imagine that I'm, again, using my imagination, I'm destroying self-cherishing selfishness, which is my biggest enemy. I know that. I'm clear. That sense of a false, fictitious sense of I that is created by ignorance that we talk about all the time here in Buddhism at the Kadampa Center. We talk about what we're empty of. That I does not exist. That we do exist. There's a body and mind that exists, and then that's self. That's the real self. And then we embellish it with this reified sense of self. And that's the one that gets us in trouble. That's the one that gets destroyed when we take on when I take on the suffering of the kids. I imagine, and then I feel it, and then I imagine that, for example, Hannah gets 4 new tires for her car and has a great summer in Austin, Texas, working for Dell Computers.
I think that makes sense, how you just described it, because it's almost like there is a strong intention and focus on taking it in, not necessarily to be brought down by the suffering and just like overwhelmed by the suffering and the sadness of other suffering, but it is the intention of this is to transmute my own self-cherishing and also to wish happiness. It's like almost like an instant, it's like together all at once.
Yeah.
Like with that intention, it's not to feel the suffering.
Exactly.
Okay.
And again, it's we need to wrap it up, but it's, as this has been said so many times, that not, some people are not ready for certain practices, like we have classes on death and impermanence. So some people would never show up for that one. I don't want to talk about death or the dying process. Heck no. I'll skip that class. But those are so all of these practices have to be taken. Everybody's so different. But these stage meditations to develop bodhicitta have stood the test of thousands of years, and they actually work. But we have to do the work. We have to do the practice. So, by the way, this book is available in the bookstore. I'm going to recommend this as the textbook for this class, but we'll talk about what we need to talk about. And most people here are familiar with mindfulness meditation, right? Would you say that? You can use your breath as the focal point. You can count your breath. You can think in and out. You can count to 10. But I think we need to develop some degree of mindfulness to make any progress on the spiritual path. So for this next week, try to do 10 minutes of mindfulness practice at least once, if not twice a day, whatever practice you choose to do. And, if something that we've talked about, like, for example, dukkha, if you want to use one of those subjects to think about, you can do a little contemplative meditation, or the equanimity meditation. You can do different ones, but I think it's important in the beginning to develop this mindfulness where you have some self-discipline. So when your mind is distracted, which it will be, we'll be doing this the rest of our lives, bringing our mind back if we're committed to developing concentration and a focused mind. The mind goes off, because that's what it's trained to do. We've trained it to think, and we bring it back. Then it goes off, and we bring it back. And it goes off, and we bring it back. Bring it back to either the breath or something that we're contemplating, like equanimity or compassion or love, like that. So let's do a dedication. Oh, I want to read, let's read this together. We can actually have this be the dedication. This text, this little thing that I handed out, I think it's by Lama Tsongkhapa, but I might be wrong. But it's said to like subsume all the teachings of Buddha Dharma are subsumed in this little these little stanzas, and I thought, wow, I'm not sure I believe that, but this is pretty cool, and it's very, very powerful, and it's a good way to think as we approach our days ahead. So let's read this together. Reveal your own shortcomings. Do not seek out others' errors. Conceal your own good qualities, but proclaim those of others. Forsake gifts and ministrations. At all times relinquish gain and fame. Have modest desires. Be easily satisfied and reciprocate kindness. Cultivate love and compassion and stabilize your awakening mind. By the way, awakening mind, again, is what? What's the Sanskrit word for awakening mind? Bodhichitta. Right. So, by the way, there's two kinds of bodhicitta. Right now, there's the conventional bodhicitta, which is what we're working on now. And there's ultimate bodhicitta, which has to do with the correct view of reality called emptiness. All right, so bodhicitta is a big term. It doesn't leave anything out. So thank you for your attention, and hopefully we'll see you back next week.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone online who joined us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.
Mm.
Ciao.